For the most updated version of the Glyphs RPG blueprint, tokens, accessories and resources, please visit www.glyphsrpg.com. Also visit 2ddice.com for our internationally popular D20 RPG coins and our other masterful coin works.
Welcome to Chapter 2 of the Blueprint. Today we're going to be talking about class archetypes. An archetype is basically my answer to the conventional class system that RPGs used. In Glyphs we use archetypes because basically an archetype represents the very raw components that go into an actual class. So in one archetype can be considered a class, but in reality, I consider it more as a set of components that you would see in a specific class. So that's one of the meanings behind the molecule logo in Glyphs, is breaking something down to its most basic components and rearranging it how you see fit. In this case, we're talking about the classes that you can create, or you can simply use the defaults in here as your own class. So in Glyphs, we look at classes in three different ways. Your first types are your combatant archetypes. Your second, third would be your uncanny archetypes, or your magic users, your power users, etc. So those are the three types that we look at. Okay, so we're going to do a quick overview here and take a look at the periodic table of archetypes. In this case, it's the combatant archetypes. So your warrior, your rogue, your fighter, and your butcher, and your outlander. Those are the five combatant archetypes that are defaulted in the Glyph system. So let's take a look real quick. Now, this example here, this is our warrior archetype. Now, before I get into detail about him, let's take a look at this square here. If you'll notice, each archetype page has little description about what they do, and this section here gives you some of the more important details that you need to know about that makes them unique. So as an example, the warrior, he can use any weapon, he can use any set of armor, his dual wielding capabilities, meaning two weapons at the same time. He can use up to one middle weapon in each hand, and you'll learn more in this chapter. The techniques that he's allowed to use are the warfare techniques. He doesn't get to use any special powers, and the modifier bonuses that he gets are the +1 to his hit. So each of the other archetype information pages, this is the part you want to focus on the most. That tells you what's unique about each one, mechanically speaking. So the warrior, this archetype is your frontline fighter, your ranged fighter, the guy that wears heavy armor. I mean, he's your powerhouse in any system. So he, he's often seen as a knight, a paladin, a soldier, a SWAT police officer, something very combat intensive. That's what this archetype assumes. The next archetype is your rogue, which is your thief, your assassin, your swashbuckler. Somebody that relies more on stealth or a little more strategy, or evasion when it comes to combat. Next we have the fighter. Now the fighter, unlike traditional RPGs where they're a warrior, and in Glyphs a fighter is just that, a fighter. A warrior kills, a fighter fights. So your fighter is your martial artist, your brawler, your boxer, your wrestler, somebody that mostly uses their body as a weapon, and of course they can use a limited set of weapons too. So very awesome archetype here. Now the techniques that they're able to use are martial arts. They're the only archetype that can use the martial arts techniques, in fact, which makes them incredibly awesome to develop as you use them. Next we have the butcher. The butcher is exactly what he looks like. You're more gruesome, more rugged barbarian, your serial killer, somebody who's an absolute powerhouse on the battlefield, and his focus more lies on primitive weaponry and getting up close and personal He can use tools, objects, anything pretty much as a weapon in order to execute maximum carnage on his opponent. Then we have the Outlander, which is basically your ranger. In most role-playing games, we consider this a ranger. So you're a frontiersman, you're a hunter, you're a ranged fighter, somebody that uses a lot of skills on navigation or survival. That's what the Outlander is basically about. So there you have it for the combatant archetypes. Now we're going to talk about supportive archetypes. Now, supportive archetypes, here you've got your scholar, your engineer, your administrator, and your commoner. Let's talk about them for a second. So your scholar is somebody that away from combat as much as possible. He's your doctor, your medicine man, your chemical engineer, somebody that who uses their skills to support the party by making components, medicines, anything of that nature. Put him in a science lab, and that's what he does best. So that's essentially what the scholar's about: research, information, things of that nature. The administrator, that's a unique archetype that basically leverages social structures. So the administrator is ideal in a civilized setting. So whereas combatant archetypes are more suited for exploration and combat and all that good stuff, an administrator is somebody that you release into town, and they leverage social structures to the party's advantage. So your lawyer, your banker, your politician, your merchant type character, somebody who leverages people to your advantage, who can actually influence the entire landscape, the social landscape to your character's advantage, your party's advantage. That's what the administrator does. So not a frontline guy by any means, but definitely a valuable resource for players who like to role play very heavily, who like to talk a lot, who prefer story. That's the type of player the administrator is recommended for. Then we have our engineer. Pretty self-explanatory, very practical archetype to use. The engineer builds things. They make things, they refine, they repair things. So your blacksmith, your weaponsmith, your armor smith, your mechanic, your astronaut, anybody who makes things happen from a practical standpoint, that's what the engineer embodies. And finally, amongst the supportive archetypes, we have the commoner. Now, that's exactly what it looks like. An average Joe or Jane, a regular person. Now, that's in there for somebody who wants to create an experience of being very average or very vulnerable to the setting, and they want to recreate that tension and that potential for development, mind you. So that's what that's intended for. Now, because this is a game, you'll notice on the arsenal, they can choose any weapon of their liking or an object. Most normal people don't, but this is a game, so we do allow that little bit of leeway. A normal person. Now, another thing about the commoner, you'll notice there is no dual wielding capabilities, techniques, powers, none of that above, or special bonuses. Average Joe. But they can learn any skill in the book as long as they're properly trained and mentored. So there is that potential as well for that character if that's a route some folks want to go. Okay, now let's take a look at the periodic table of uncanny archetypes. So your Marvel, which is your superhero type character, your Priest, which is your cleric type, or Druid. Then you have your Magus, which is your Enchanter, your Sorcerer, self-explanatory, your Witch, and your Summoner. So the Marvel, like I mentioned, this is somebody, it's more like a superhero or supervillain type character for those type of settings. Their powers are activated instantly through will, and they have access to the Marvel power spectrum, as you'll see in the powers chapter. Okay, the Priest, like I mentioned, is your cleric or druid, somebody that uses the power of the divine or nature to produce apparent miracles to the party is essentially what this does. So, extremely handy archetype to have in a more supportive role. That's your healer or your necromancer, depending on which way you want to play this character. Okay, then we have the Magus. The Magus I like to consider a practical magician, somebody who makes things better, somebody who can enchant objects, items. They can endow weapons with elemental abilities. They can manipulate time and etheric energies. So very useful archetype to have in your party. Then you have your sorcerer, pretty straightforward. Your battle magician, somebody who uses a lot of who uses their natural innate power to exert destructive force or manipulate illusions. Then we have the witch archetype. Now the witch is really cool because this is somebody who can manipulate actual attributes on a character. They can manipulate fate itself and probabilities against their targets or in the party's favor. Now, what makes them unique is there's actually two ways to use a witch. The first, meaning more conventional ritualistic fashion, where the witch is removed from the party in their own little sacred space, and they conduct their rituals, and their power will have an effect on their target no matter where they are in the world. Now, the second way to use them is in real time. Basically, they prepare their spell, their ability, and with a power word or destroying an effigy or whatnot, they activate their power right then and there in combat. So a lot of cool ways to play with the witch. Very powerful once you understand how to use this archetype. And last but not least, we have the summoner. Now the summoner is pretty self-explanatory. Somebody who conjures demons, beasts to their advantage. Now, we'll talk about more about the summoner's power in the power section, but basically they evoke entities, they invoke the power of their entities as their own, or they can control other creatures that are already directly in their line of sight. So that's for somebody who likes to play the Beastmaster role, the Conjurer, somebody who likes control over other creatures for their advantage. So a great deal of what makes Glyphs such a flexible system for players in particular is its approach to class creation. Is designed to be seen as a set of components used to create your class. So real quick, let's take a look at the base components that compose any archetype. First, we've got your modifier bonuses that are eligible for that archetype. Then you have your exclusive of that particular archetype. So it is a set of skills that only that archetype can use, which makes it more unique. Okay. Then we have the powers or techniques that archetype is eligible to use. Then you've got the armor and equipment like that the archetype is able to use. And last but not least, your weapon sets that archetype is eligible to use. So those are the basic components that go into any archetype. So the ones here in the book, they're already mapped to an archetype by default, but like I said, feel free to hack and tweak as you see fit. If you're going to create your new archetype, then this is a page 39. That's what you would consider when you go to create your own. So let's talk about classes. I've thrown that word out quite a bit, and most people are familiar with it. Now, in Glyphs, there are 3 ways you can make a class from the existing archetypes, or if you even create your own, if that's what you want to do. But there's 3 ways we're going to approach this. The first way is very simple, it's a solitary class. So a solitary class is simply using the existing archetype, one of them, as a class. So as an example, you may have a character that you want to create as a knight. Well, in your system, a knight simply may be something as simple as a warrior. So in that example, the solitary class that you would choose would be the warrior archetype, which in your setting becomes the knight class. Or if you're playing a ranger, well, a lot of games have that type of character, so a ranger may simply be nothing more than the outlander archetype. Okay, that's the example of the solitary class approach. The most popular by far, and the one I recommend the most, is the blended class. Now the blended class is you're picking 2 archetypes to use. Okay, and from there you create your class. So you have your dominant archetype, which is the one that's going to use the most equipment from, I guess you could say. So let's take a look at that on the dominant side, and then the supportive archetype basically helps supplement, provide supplemental stuff to the class. Okay, so what do I mean when I say that? So the modifiers, if you're using a blended class, your modifiers always come from the dominant archetype. Your armor always belongs to the dominant archetype. Your weapons, same thing. Now, experience points that are awarded for any weapon proficiencies, they're halved. So keep that in mind. Skills, you can choose from the dominant and subordinate. So skills are fair game there. Okay, except any experience that that you earn using skills are halved. So that's the trade-off to that. And finally, we have powers and techniques. You can choose from the dominant or subordinate archetype. But again, if you're using the blended approach, any experience that you earn from a power or a technique is also halved. So that's really all there is to it. Very straightforward. So mix and match as you see fit, and see what you come up with. Now, on here, let's take a look at your character sheet real quick. So on the sheet, all you do is very simple. Let's say I'm playing a warrior and a fighter. Let's say I want to max out my character more as a warrior, have him use more warrior-like equipment and techniques and whatnot, and weapons. So just put a number 1 in the box, very simple, and number 2 on the fighter. Okay, my handwriting's horrible today. I'm writing with my left hand. So that's all there is to it, and that lets you know which your dominant and subordinate archetypes are. Now, the third method, and this is by far the most flexible, but also has a possibility to skew things around a little bit if you're more obsessed about optimization and party balance and all that stuff, but it is there for those people that like to experiment. Basically, all it really means, mix and match any component that you wish as you see fit to create your character. So that's all there is to it. Now, the trade-off is, if you use that method, any experience that you earn in any way is cut in half, and all ether point requirements are doubled. So if you have a power that uses 10 ether, if you're freestyle, suddenly it becomes 20. If you earn 15 experience, then suddenly it becomes 7 or whatever. You can round it up if you want, but that's essentially the trade-off to using freestyle. So more flexibility has more penalties, I guess you could say, and so that's why, again, I recommend going, but that's entirely up to you and the game master. So when you're creating a class, you have a lot of freedom, and as long as the game master, your architect, is on board, then pretty much anything goes. So in this example here, we have a sample blended class, which is a paladin. Now, in my case, I'm considering a paladin a combination of a warrior and a priest. Now, the warrior is dominant, and my priest's archetype is subordinate. So, for modifiers, I get a hit +1 for the warrior. Okay, for armor, I get the warrior's equipment. For weapons, same thing, I get the warrior's equipment. Now, for skills, I can choose between the warrior and the priest exclusive skills. And for powers and techniques, very simple. I can use the priest powers of thaumaturgy, and I get the warfare techniques of the warrior. So that's a snapshot of that. Now, example solitary class would be a brawler in this case. So as a solitary class, I'm simply using the fighter archetype, and here I have all the variables pertaining to that. So pretty straightforward. Again, there's a lot of experimenting to do, a lot of mixing and matching, but basically this system allows you to create just about any character you want with the archetype system. So have fun and enjoy.